Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Join me today. We're going to discuss the psychological impact that the current state of affairs is having on people. We're also going to discuss practical ways that we can help ourselves and our families cope in the midst of this challenging time. I want to talk about the effects that massive change, massive sudden deprivation of norms, and also the deprivation of social interaction has upon people. I'm coming to you today not only as a nurse, but a background as a psych nurse. I worked for several years in an inpatient setting, helping people from 4 years old all the way up to late 70s with various different issues, but most of them were having a very, very challenging time. Very similar to what people are experiencing now, and definitely a lot of people are having a hard time. But I'm coming to you not just as a psych nurse, but I'm coming from a biblical perspective and also from a perspective that values rights, natural rights, and self-sufficiency. So my take on things may be a little bit different than other people, but just take what you can, right? Take the meat, leave the bones, if you deem that there are any. So I want to discuss with you briefly what happens when people are rapidly deprived of their learned coping mechanisms. In the United States, the way that people deal with hard times, a lot of times includes drinking, it includes partying, it includes going to bars, it includes numbing the conscience or distracting the self with sporting events or more toxic things that are available usually online. I'm going to keep it G-rated. And so for this reason, we're seeing a lot of people now that are struggling to deal with their psychological issues that they're having. A lot of this is spiritual too, guys. When you're dealing with aloneness, and when you're dealing with the feelings of being stuck and of being trapped, none of this is normal from a human experience. Human beings were created by God to be free on this earth, and definitely not to have some power tell them you can go here, you can't go here. Last time I checked, that's called incarceration and or enslavement. So with people who are rapidly being deprived of their ability to interact with other people, and especially the elderly at this point, who are being deprived of their social support network, and especially touch. This has a very deleterious effect on people's sanity, but on people's emotional regulation. Touch especially, and this is something we can't do. Like, we're not supposed to give hugs right now. We're not supposed to to touch people's hands or shake hands or give embraces or anything like that. Oxytocin is released, which is a feel-good love hormone, basically. That's released whenever we touch people. Human beings are set. Like, our default setting is to need touch. And so in a way, being so separated from people, while it may be sound from an epidemiological standpoint, is very deleterious to people's emotional and physical well-being, because touch is how we have been programmed to regulate ourselves. Depression results when people have a chronic under satisfactory level of oxytocin, a chronic deficit of it. And so I want to talk about what we're seeing in public when we interact with people, but also how we can make our homes a space of healing, regeneration, and peace. You've probably noticed when you go out in public now that people are more pressured in the way that they're interacting with each other. They're definitely less patient than they have been perhaps previously. And this all is stemming from a lack of control and a loss of normal. When you look at across the spectrum, regardless of what the trauma is on people, an individual's relative sense of helplessness in a given situation is a predictive factor to whether or not that person will experience complications and being stuck in a cycle of trauma. Okay? We need to specifically talk about how this fact affects children. Hopefully I'll remember to get this in the middle of the video. So we see that in public, people are more pressured. Frankly, because a lot of people are masked up, it's harder to read people. It's harder to read situations because we as human beings for thousands of years have read a lot of nonverbal communication from the entirety of the face and the configuration of the face. Babies are programmed from the time that they are born to gaze at people's faces as a critical part of bonding, of oxytocin release, but also of gleaning the information that they will have to survive. So there's a lot of impact in a very, very sudden way that is pulling on people. And it's for this reason people are sinking into horrible depression right now. The suicide rate is up because people are having essentially the rug pulled out from under them from a normalcy standpoint. We talked about touch deprivation for sure being a critical component of this. You know, it is what it is. And unfortunately, when you have the limitation of people's social interactions, it really has a deleterious effect, not only on their emotional standpoint, on the emotional well-being of this person, but also on their immune system. And we don't think about this, but oxytocin release and the basically the cascade of effects that the touch hormone releases, it helps regulate our immune system. Laughter, being together in shared spaces with people who are laughing. I'm thinking of in these large cities, a lot of the times the only places where people can meaningfully congregate to share laughter is bars and public places. You know, these poor people are living so cramped and so cloistered on top of each other and living in these very, very small homes in an unnormal configuration. And when you deprive people of their emotional regulatory mechanisms, you're going to see some severe problems. And in most people, that turns inward. In most people, they tend towards depression. But in some groups of people, it turns outwards and it turns into sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies to harm other people or to take advantage of people or to engage in criminal activity. Okay, so I'm anticipating that we are going to see an increase in all of these things, not the least of which is domestic abuse. Okay, because when you have people that are together, we love our family, of course, but people tend to vent on each other, especially verbally and emotionally. And so we need to be very cognizant of this fact when we're dealing with our families at home. There's a scriptural principle here. The power of life and death are in the tongue. Okay, and then also we have later in James, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, for the anger of man does not accomplish the righteousness of the Lord. I know it's challenging. I know it's to try and keep our tempers at a regulated level. But if we can speak, instead of speaking frustration and cursing over people, speaking life, blessing, and peace. And I'm not talking about cursing in wordy dirt, four-letter. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about speaking harmful and cruel things towards people. If we can opt instead to speak life and blessing and peace over people, that's going to make powerful ripple effects. And I know you may think that this is crazy, but I do it when I'm in public. I do. If I have to go to the store or I have to go and interact with someone, I try and be, even if I don't feel at that moment positive and happy, even if I'm like, I wish these people would just hurry up, whatever the case may be. If we can, and I've fallen short, y'all, so I'm not an angel in this. I really try as best as I can. But at the cash register or just interacting with people, be grateful and try and thank people. But also, I said this at the cashier today. It's like, life, blessing, and peace. May the Lord bless you with life, blessing, and peace. And it kind of shocks people in a way. I don't care about offending people in that way. I mean, how many people, think about this, guys. Think about the power that we have to bless somebody, even a stranger. We don't know what was spoken over them at their homes before they left for work in the morning. They could have been with an abusive husband or wife or a family member who made them feel like crap. They could have had someone yell at them or vent on them just 10 minutes before us. We have the power to speak life, blessing, and peace over people, not just in our homes, but also in our interaction with in the public. So I want to talk about the financial impacts of stress let me go back. The stress impacts of the financial deprivation that people are dealing with during the Great Depression. If you haven't watched the movie Cinderella Man, by the way, with Russell Crowe, first off, yay for Russell Crowe, but it's a great, great film. And it talks about staying together as a family in the midst of tough times. A lot of men, unfortunately, because of the shame that came with the lack of provision, right? Because they lost their jobs during the Great Depression, they abandoned their families. Okay? Shame is a paralyzing emotion for people. And so as best as possible, we need to be avoiding shaming people. That is so huge right now. Avoid shame. Opt for blessing, opt for life, opt for encouragement, opt for peace, and supporting and promoting peace with people. Stress compounds on people. For my psych workers out there, y'all probably know the GAF score, the Global Assessment of Functioning. Basically, the GAF score is how much bad stuff has happened to you over the past year. And based on how much bad stuff has happened to you, we can relatively predict what your likelihood is for depression and other things going on. People's GAF scores are in the toilet right now, man. People have lost their jobs. They have no sense of normal. They may be late on X, Y, and Z. And for many cases, this is not their fault. When you have a governmental entity that is telling people you aren't essential and you can't feed your family today because you elected to choose career X. Doesn't matter if you were having a lucrative business before or if you were doing well before and paying your bills, because some person in a committee somewhere far, far away says you're not essentially your family has to suffer. That is so damaging towards the cohesiveness of families and also the emotional stability of primary providers and breadwinners in the family. So we need to be conscious of this. Ways that we can create blessing and an attitude of shalom in the home, peace in the home. I want to actually unpack that for a minute. Shalom in the ancient Near Eastern sense and in the Hebraic sense, the original sense of the word, is not this English concept of an absence of peace. In English, peace is essentially a negative. You define this with a negative term. Peace is the absence of conflict, right? But peace is the absence of conflict. In shalom, it's the presence of fullness, okay? And so for that reason, when we have our families at home, one of the things that we can do is to create an attitude of blessing. And the way that we do this primarily is through our speech, speaking life, blessing, and peace over people. Even if it's the people in the line at the grocery store, we can do it at home too. I also like to keep around positive music. And I mentioned this before, guys. Prayer, intercession, and fasting is huge on this. Join me for fasting and prayer on Thursdays for the duration of this thing, that the Lord would give mercy to our country, even though we haven't deserved it, but also personal repentance, right? We know that this has powerful ripple effects, but an attitude of worship and an attitude of blessing and an attitude of positivity in the home can really help counteract the negative impacts of the world. There's a Michael Card song, which I'll try and link to up here, that talks about home. You know, a place to leave the darkness outside. Yeah, you guys should definitely listen to that song. It's really good. I'm a Michael Card junkie. Was raised on it. There's going to be like 30,000 comments in the thing below, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you love Michael Card. I do too. But yes, that song that talks about home, that should be our focus right now, right? In building a place and in keeping a place where we leave the darkness outside and where we nurture love and positivity and blessing. Harp music is one of the great ways to do that. Harp, like David. And I'll put a link also up here to Steve Reese. He has a channel where basically he plays the Psalms on the harp, right? He plays these songs. And let me tell you, man, there is power. There is power in that. And I have used it with friends of mine who are convalescing from major surgery, like having stints in the ICU, major surgery. And they've reported to me afterwards that it was that music and hearing that music that helped them even when they weren't conscious, okay? So creating a home of blessing. And let's also talk about ways that practically we can help our children and help young people in the midst of this. If you can't, before I go on to young people, let me give a quick word for the elders in our sphere. It is so challenging right now because we're trying to obviously protect people. The official guidance has been to try and protect people and limit our physical interactions with our elders. But like I said, touch deprivation is already a serious problem in nursing homes. People feel depressed when they aren't regularly touched. And I don't mean with a glove. I'm talking skin to skin. Skin to skin, we need it when we're old, and we definitely need it when we're young. Working as a birth nurse for several years, for those of you who've ever had a baby in the NICU, you know kangaroo care. That skin-to-skin contact, that is essential for appropriate bonding, but also for regulation of a baby's body and their little systems, okay? So we need touch. And when we don't have touch, problems happen. So we need to proactively plan to compensate for this as best as possible. Praying, worship, positive music, a positive attitude is part of this. With children, though, specifically, we need to empower them, and not from a weird social justice warrior sort of thing. We need to empower our children to have actionable options in times of crisis. And the way that we do this is to give them physical control and the ability to physically manipulate matter in their environment positively. Maria Montessori has a link. I'll put a link to basically a list of age-appropriate tasks that are chores around the home that A, help keep kids off of the stinking video game consoles, but B, can help them have a sense of control over their environment. Because if you remember back to the beginning part of this video, we talked about how that lack of control and that helplessness is a major predictive factor to whether or not a person is likely to have complications from exposure to difficult times and traumatic incidents. So when we arm children with proactive steps that they can take to change their environment for the positive, whether it's setting the table, whether it's helping to wash the dishes, walk the dog, helping with sorting things, whatever it is, We need to be able to do that and to help give them a sense of control. Routine is also important, right? It is. Routine's important. And it's challenging right now because a lot of people are spending a ton of time on screens, just like the one that I'm reaching you with right now, which is highly ironic, but it makes the point. People are spending a lot of time on screens, and that blue light can disrupt your circadian rhythm, okay? Especially late at night, because we have been for thousands of years working on the cycle of the physical world. Sun goes down, moon comes up, the seasons change. Our bodies are part of this system. We disrupt that system with light input at night, 1, 2, 3 a.m. watching this stuff, and then we wonder why we can't get to sleep. I'm telling y'all, prioritizing that sleep is really important right now, okay? So if we can, turn off the overhead lights. If you're using fluorescent lights, I get it, maybe a little hard to try and reconfigure things right now. Just try and limit your exposure to these, because the spectrum's just really kind of screwy with your immune system and definitely with your circadian rhythm. Turn off the screens at least an hour before bedtime and allow yourself to come down from that stimulation. We need to give ourselves a break, and especially one day a week. I would submit to you, one day a week, a Sabbath, if you will, where we are allowing ourselves to unhook from everything and to engage in the physical realm and just to spend time in prayer and reflection and worship too. The fasting is a big part of it, guys. I do believe that in the midst of all of this, there's a definite spiritual component. I believe and I think and I conclude based on my biblical understanding that we are in a very, very trying time right now, and we are probably going to see more of it, but we know that prayer and fasting and repentance changes things. And even if we as a country and as a nation are judged for the abominable things that we have endorsed at every level of government, the Lord has promised in his faithfulness to be with his people. Join me for fasting and prayer on Thursdays, fasting and prayer for a covering and for a protection over our homes, over our families, over our cities and towns, but also fasting and praying that the Lord would give our leaders, our elected leaders, they are not our overlords, they are our servants, that he would give our official servants wisdom in the midst of everything, that they would see what they need to see, that they would listen to good counsel, and that they would resist the urge to take power and to steal rights from people and to manipulate the masses and to deceive people into believing that if they give up their freedom that they'll be able to purchase a little temporary security. We need to be beseeching the Lord for wisdom for our families right now, but also just praying and interceding for our governments. Psalm 20, Psalm 91, Psalm 121, Psalm 39, and Psalm 150 are some of the Psalms that I've been meditating on in the midst of everything. So join me for fasting and praying on Thursdays. Passover's coming up, and I actually, because I am a firstborn, I know it's thoroughly shocking to those of you who've ever studied family dynamics. You're like, yeah, I call that one from long away. But for the firstborn, I participate in the tradition of the fast of the firstborn, which is in the day leading up to the evening of Passover, that the firstborn, if you are a firstborn child, that you fast during that time, basically as a remembrance, but also as a point of thanksgiving. Because when we remember the Exodus and we remember the Passover in Egypt in the biblical narrative, it was measure for measure. It was measure for measure that the firstborn of Egypt were struck down. And it's tempting to look at that and think, that was so cruel and unfair. But when we look at what Pharaoh did to the babies, to the Hebrew babies, by slaughtering them, slaughtering the innocent, in the previous generation, we see that it came back. So, fasting and prayer and remembrance of deliverance and remembrance of the Lord's faithfulness at this time, so many thousands of years ago. He's still the same God, and he's still on the throne, and he is still faithful to his people. And that's what I have for y'all today. I hope it was helpful for y'all. If you did enjoy the video, please subscribe to me. You can also support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, as well as cryptocurrency. I have links in the description box below. Hope it was helpful for y'all. Stay safe. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.